If you look at this chart tracking stock market participation, you'll see a massive anomaly starting right around 2020. We begin the decade with less than 8 million young adults holding any stocks whatsoever. By 2026, that number has blown up to over 50 million. That is an entire demographic deciding, seemingly overnight, to dump large portions of their paychecks into the market. It leaves us with a pressing question. Are teenagers suddenly displaying extreme financial brilliance, or is this a collective cry for help? A large part of the initial surge can be traced directly back to Silicon Valley. Around 2018, consumer brokerage apps like Robinhood and Webull made buying shares as frictionless as swiping on a social media feed. They hired behavioral psychology PhDs to add confetti animations and zero-commission trades, engineering a system that mimics a Vegas casino. But slick user interfaces and gamified dopamine hits only explain the mechanics of how young people are trading so easily. A clean app design doesn't explain why an entire generation is suddenly so eager to put their livelihood on the line. To understand the motivation, you have to look at where this demographic gets its education. The vast majority of young retail investors are completely bypassing traditional financial advisors. Instead, they source their market strategies directly from social media finfluencers. That social ecosystem is riddled with quiet, predatory mechanics. It is now remarkably common for executives of small-cap public companies to secretly sponsor content from these creators, slotting their specific ticker symbols right next to beginner tutorials on options trading. Here is exactly how that legal pump-and-dump scheme operates. The company spends its capital on YouTube marketing rather than exploring for actual resources or building their business. The sponsored videos pump up retail demand. Then, the executives issue new shares and dump them onto the market at peak prices, transferring wealth from young viewers directly into their own pockets. While the scams and the casino apps capture the headlines, they only account for the vocal minority. The bulk of that 50 million person surge, roughly 60 to 70%, isn't chasing 100x gains. They are aggressively buying boring index funds, indicating a deep systemic panic rather than mere greed. If you want to find the root of that panic, you have to examine the single economic anchor that has historically defined adult stability in North America: owning a home. Look at this ratio from 1981. Back then, a typical house cost roughly 3 times what the average family made in a single year. Today, the national average requires 5.5 times a family's annual income. And if you want to live in a desirable major city like Toronto, Seattle, or San Diego, you are looking at 10 to 13 times your annual income. The mathematical consequence of this shift is devastating. The old-school blueprint of saving a portion of your cash, buying a starter house, and letting it quietly print equity for 30 years is effectively dead for new entrants. Because the baseline milestone for financial security is now mathematically out of reach, young people find themselves in a ticking clock scenario. You either put your money into the market as early as possible, or you fall further and further behind every single year.
Economists have a specific name for the psychological fallout of this broken math. They call it financial nihilism. It happens when traditional milestones collapse and cash continuously loses its purchasing power. Under these conditions, the economy mutates. Capital stops flowing into traditional savings accounts and gets redirected into a meme economy. People pour their paychecks into highly speculative, artificially scarce assets, treating rare trading cards and aggressive sports betting as viable paths to wealth. And while this seems like a distinctly modern phenomenon, it is actually a deeply predictable human response. Look at this photograph from the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. These are children using massive stacks of hyperinflated German currency as literal building blocks. When the German currency collapsed, the government printed absurd denominations like this 5 billion mark note. In response, everyday citizens instantly traded their paper money for any tangible asset they could get their hands on: gold, real estate, livestock. This same impulse to escape a failing currency drives modern youth to park their wealth in any asset with verifiable scarcity. Whenever the traditional rules of a fiat system break down, society reacts rationally. They abandon the failing currency and pile into high-risk lifeboats. There is an even deeper psychological toll to modern capitalism. driven by the rise of the subscription economy. It has quietly, almost invisibly, eliminated the concept of physical ownership from our daily lives. Over the last 40 years, our personal agency has been systematically stripped away. Corporations and banks have repackaged it and rented it back to us on a monthly basis. The extraction is comprehensive. Young people are priced out of the real estate market, yes, but they are also legally barred from permanently owning the music they listen to, the movies they watch, and the software they use to do their jobs. In an environment structured entirely around systemic extraction, aggressive market behavior is a search for control. If you cannot own your home or your media, you find something you can own, even if it's just a fractional share of a company. The act of investing, whether it is buying a fractional share of a company or purchasing a digital asset, remains one of the few uncorrupted expressions of personal agency still legally accessible to the working class. This is a large part of why Bitcoin has captured so much attention. Its appeal relies on mathematically verifiable ownership. The code enforces strict scarcity, meaning a central authority cannot arbitrarily duplicate your asset or print away its value. At our core, humans are a species of hoarders. We need to stake a claim and plant a flag on our own territory. Having a piece of property with your name on it is a psychological baseline for human security. Throwing a paycheck into the stock market before you can legally buy a beer is a calculated attempt to buy back agency. It is the rational move for a generation that sees the traditional ladders of wealth being pulled up in front of them. We have built an economy that systematically prices an entire generation out of the American dream. Participating in that flawed market is expensive, but succumbing to total nihilism is far worse.